Stay just like that. Here we go. Smile. Click, snap.
Welcome to the Age of Calamity, a story about how 4 of Hyrule's mightiest champions carked it, about how Link was so badly injured he had to be cryogenically frozen for 100 years, and about how Zelda found herself locked in what I'm sure felt like an eternity of keeping Calamity Ganon from destroying everything. Come on, Link, wake up! Yes, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is destined to have a bummer of an ending, but as a diehard Breath of the Wild fan, I'm still psyched to dive into the calamitous events referenced throughout that game, to see the champions in their prime, to visit the Hyrule of 100 years ago, and to learn more about exactly how Ganon was once more unleashed upon the world. On November 20th, we can do just that, and everything I've seen so far has me pretty excited. So excited, in fact, that I came up with 54 things that I think Breath of the Wild fans will love about Age of Calamity. Right out of the gate, Age of Calamity is effectively a canon prequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and that's a huge deal. Yes, it's a Dynasty Warriors style game, but unlike the previous Hyrule Warriors games, the developers at Koei have been collaborating with Nintendo's Zelda team at every step of the way.
Including gameplay direction, graphics, world, and all dialogue.
That's a very good thing. It means this is an authentic look back at the Great Calamity. And from a story perspective, there's so much to explore here beyond the big question of who is pulling the strings behind the resurrection of Calamity Ganon. I'd like to know more about the background of the Sheikah clan, what happened to Zelda's mother, and how it all went down for the champions as their divine beasts were corrupted and the Blight spawn. I'd also like to see more of the relationships between core characters, Zelda and Urbosa, Link and Zelda, Link and Mipha, Pura and Impa, and so on. Perhaps we'll even meet Link's family in Hatenyo Village. Plus, how does Zelda wind up with the Sheikah Slate, and how does Link get the Master Sword? Look familiar? Yes, the world map is back, and from here we'll be roaming far and wide across a Hyrule 100 years younger than it was in Breath of the Wild. A lot has changed on the ground, but from up here, key locations like Hyrule Castle, the Korok Forest, and Death Mountain are all present and correct. In terms of changes, we'll be able to visit locations that were thriving during this time period, but only scrappy ruins by the time we came across them in Breath of the Wild. Of course, once evil rises, we'll likely be fighting our way through them, so it's not exactly sightseeing, but still, I've always been curious to know what places like Mabe Village and Gaponga Village were once like. In Age of Calamity, we don't actually get to explore the world as a continuous landscape like we did in Breath of the Wild, but the mission maps themselves can be quite large, and for an action game in the Dynasty Warriors milieu, hopping directly to our destination is no bad thing. While you're on the map, by the way, Link is actually at Central Tower, so when you choose a mission that takes him somewhere else in the game world, you'll see him teleport away from there. Oh, and check out this neat touch. Remember Breath of the Wild's loading screen? As you completed each divine beast, it showed up on the loading screen, so by the end of the game, you had a little elephant, lizard, bird, camel, and motorbike bopping along. Here, it seems as though the loading screen shows the main characters, and in a nice touch, that means you have the 4 divine beast pilots, as well as what I presume are Zelda, Impa, the adorable new Mini Guardian, and Link. Coming back to the map, the world itself is formally divided up into large regions, so missions and subquests completed contribute to your progress in the area as a whole, presumably unlocking more options. As an example, the Gerudo region takes in the desert, the highlands, and the mountains to the east and southeast, while Necluda encompasses Daya Village, Kakariko Village, and Hatenyo Village. It seems silly to get excited about how much some of the locations in Age of Calamity look like their Breath of the Wild counterparts, but still, I love this. Gerudo Town, for instance, is spot on. It even has the bar where we had to eavesdrop to hear the Gerudo Secret Club password. It's also cool being able to easily place yourself in the world. The Sheikah clan hideout, for instance, is still instantly recognisable, as is Korok Forest, thanks in no small part to the Great Deku Tree. A lot of the icons on the map are text-based interactions as opposed to places you can visit, but as a huge fan of this world, I'm still keen to discover it all. Quite why this isn't Beetle, however, I'm not sure. Cooking is back, but things have changed somewhat. Rather than experimenting and finding your own recipes, you instead have to unlock recipes first. And then, if you have all the ingredients, you can choose to cook a dish ahead of each mission to get a specific perk that will hopefully do some work. Meals themselves have changed too. This was the recipe we just showed being unlocked. It uses chillfin trout, an ingredient Breath of the Wild players will be familiar with, but the resulting dish has a different but similar-ish effect. Instead of turning into a meal that boosts Link's heat resistance when exploring the world, which isn't a factor in Age of Calamity, it instead boosts his heat resistance in combat, reducing fire damage taken by 50%. It's a pretty neat fit, really. Chillfin Trout, of course, is just one of many ingredients and items you'll collect as you fight and visit different locations on the map. In the footage we've seen so far, I've spotted a stack of things that Breath of the Wild fans will remember well. Ancient cores, Hylian rice, raw gourmet meat, restless crickets, all this stuff, coarser bee honey, cane sugar, wild berries, and Jura carrots. Mighty bananas are also in the mix. After all, no Yiga foot soldier leaves home without them. So crafting ingredients are familiar, but really that's nowhere near as cool as the bestiary that's also been brought across to Age of Calamity. I love how faithful these foes are. Bokoblins stamp their feet in rage before attacking, Moblins pound the ground with clubs, the Zalfos try and blend into the environment, Lionels leap at you, Hinoxes try and crush you, Taluses have ore deposit weak spots on their backs, and Yiga Blade Masters will try and take you out with tornado attacks. It seems likely all the key enemies from Breath of the Wild will be represented, extending from the undead all the way through to bigger beasts like Molduga. Combat against these malicious marauders looks like a heap of fun, whether you're launching enemies into the air and firing off a volley of arrows mid-combo, sending waves of enemies crashing into anyone behind them, or you're dodging perfectly to trigger flurry rushes. Each character seems to have a distinct playstyle too, from Zelda's heavy Sheikah slate use through to Impa's incredible agility, but more on those two later. While combat looks sweet, it's clear that it's going to be less improvisational than Breath of the Wild. So you're not going to be disarming enemies, then taking their weapon, or giving enemies weapons for that matter, and letting hilarity ensue. That said, the environments are littered with opportunities to cause havoc in combat, letting you use metal crates, bodies of water, and explosive barrels to your advantage. Enemy weapons, too, can be turned against them.
Here it goes!
Enemies also have similar attack patterns to their Breath of the Wild brethren, and I love that they'll still do things like throwing rocks at you if there's no weapon to hand. We haven't confirmed that Moblins will throw Bokoblins at you just yet, but it seems pretty likely. You'll see some pretty familiar enemy structures too, like platforms built around trees and giant stone skull dwellings. The difference this time is that they can all be demolished. Trees also can be chopped down or toppled by explosions. It wouldn't be a Breath of the Wild prequel without felling trees. Nor would Link be Link without the ability to save people in distress. Hey, Boko, leave him alone. Get out of here. Some enemies have learnt new tricks too. These blue Bokos throw their clubs at you, for instance, while we've also learnt that some Moblin area bosses wield fire. Oh, and Bokoblins come in supersized varieties now, as do explosive barrels. Bigger means better, right? In Breath of the Wild, an enemy's colour dictated how tough it was, starting with red, then blue and black, then moving on to silver and eventually gold if you were playing Master Mode. It'll be interesting to see if colours mean the same thing in Age of Calamity, or perhaps they just denote different variants. In any case, so far we haven't spotted any silver or gold enemies, but it seems extremely likely they'll be included. Age of Calamity also introduces some new faces, such as this dual-wielding Hyrule Warrior, who is, according to Nintendo of America, second in charge after Master Koga. We've also had a glimpse of a mysterious new villain, who may well be the fortune teller referenced in Breath of the Wild. It'll be interesting to see how this pair tie into the rise of Calamity Ganon. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of Age of Calamity is the fact that we'll be able to spend time with some of the most iconic allies we met in Breath of the Wild. It's awesome to see Impa as an energetic young woman, for instance, although her fashion sense hasn't evolved much.
It has been quite a long time, Link.
Robbie, meanwhile, is as offbeat as ever.
Rule 1 of the researcher's code is to never give up.
And in case you didn't recognize him, remember this pose? Are you sure you don't remember it? He only did it like 20 times. Okay, that's enough, Robbie. Pura, on the other hand, is actually Impa's older sister, even though when we first met her 100 years later, she was only 6. Look, it's a whole experimenting with runes gone wrong thing. Anyway, just like Robbie, by this time she'd already picked her pose, and then continued to use it for another 100 years. Anyway, I can't wait to see the role they play in the story. And then there are the champions, who we only met through flashbacks and ghostly interactions in Breath of the Wild. It's awesome to see them in their prime and to get to use them in combat, as their fighting styles all promise to be really unique. Let's quickly profile each one. Urbosa is the Gerudo pilot of Varna Boris and, during this time period, the owner of the Thunder Helm, so it makes complete sense that this fierce warrior harnesses electricity. More than that, if you can find a moment to step outside the fray, she can use ZR to charge up and actually store electricity, which she can then channel into more powerful attacks. Mipha is the Princess of Zora, the pilot of Vah Ruta, and quite a fan of Link's.
Perhaps we could spend some time together.
She's also a healer, so it's likely that will come into play, although so far we've primarily seen some of her awesome wave and fountain water attacks. Daruk is the Goron champion and the pilot of Vah Rudania. He can roll around the battlefield and uses the power of magma in his attacks. And of course, he can protect himself.
Daruk's protection is now ready to roll.
Rivali is a member of the Rito tribe and Vah Meadow's pilot. He's most comfortable up in the air, raining arrows from above. Also sneering at Link from above.
Good luck sealing the darkness!
He wields a sweet, multi-shot bow. Speaking of Rivali's Great Eagle bow, this was a pretty special piece of gear in Breath of the Wild, as were the other champions' weapons. Urbosa's Scimitar of the Seven, Mipha's Lightscale Trident, and Daruk's Boulder Breaker. Why? Because they could be repaired. And now we get to use them again, and in the hands of their original owners, no less. Remember how massive the Boulder Breaker was for Link? Daruk wields it easily with one hand. These aren't the only familiar weapons in Age of Calamity, of course. A few others we've seen so far include the Soldier's Broadsword, Zora Sword, Soldier's Spear, Traveller's Claymore, Feathered Spear, Feathered Edge, and the Iron Sledgehammer. And on the subject of the Iron Sledgehammer, we've been given a really good look at this weapon in action, and it's a far cry from the slow and heavy tool it was in Breath of the Wild. It's shaping up to be a totally viable and super fun choice. I also love how this spinning dive attack is reminiscent of Breath of the Wild's Zora Helm spin attack. I really like the fact that most weapons were gone for good after they broke in Breath of the Wild, but this won't be the case in Age of Calamity. Instead, your weapons persist, but you'll be able to level them up by fusing them with other weapons. This not only makes them stronger, but lets you build up perks too. I can't wait to see how insanely overpowered a soup ladle can become. As for the Master Sword, I'm not too sure how it will factor into this system, but presumably it's an endgame weapon. Visiting the blacksmith isn't the only way to improve your abilities in combat. This subquest, to collect monster parts for instance, rewards you with a bonus combo for two-handed weapons. One of the hallmarks of Breath of the Wild was how playful its selection of weapons was. In that game, Link was able to wield all sorts of objects like mops, pitchforks, and the bones of his vanquished foes. It feels like Age of Calamity may be heading in the same direction, if weapons like the soup ladle and the pot lid shield are anything to go by, and that's definitely a good thing. Here's hoping we can also wade through Calamity Ganon's forces with weapons like a tree branch, spring-loaded hammer, or Korok leaf. And speaking of Koroks, you didn't think they'd be left out, did you? Yes, you'll still be finding Koroks and collecting their seeds, although to what end we don't know yet. Will they serve a similar purpose to Breath of the Wild? Maybe, as we do know that Hestu is featured and...
Finally! Somebody sees me!
Wait, what? Hestu is fully voiced? Okay. But enough of all this weapon talk, as there's one character in Age of Calamity who doesn't wield a traditional weapon at all, Princess Zelda. No, the only weapon Zelda needs is the Sheikah Slate, and using it she can roll massive bombs, steer a huge remote bomb spewing remote bomb, slap enemies silly with metal crates, and detonate Cryonis blocks. Zelda's special skill even uses a familiar Sheikah Slate ability, the camera, which highlights then damages all the enemies in frame. Zelda looks awesome. Of course, Sheikah rune powers are available to all, but every playable character utilises them differently, so every rune, Stasis, Magnesis, Remote Bomb and Cryonis, corresponds to a unique attack. It's very cool seeing what each character can do. Oh, and a few things to bear in mind. It appears that you'll start out with just Remote Bombs and Cryonis, then unlock the rest as you progress. Time slows down while you're choosing which rune to use too, but just like Breath of the Wild, once you've used a rune, it needs time to recharge. Importantly, it's not just the Sheikah runes that you'll be drawing on in addition to hacking and slashing. Elemental powers appear to be just as important in Age of Calamity as they were in Breath of the Wild. Defeated Wizrobes drop elemental rods, and once you have them they can be assigned to a pop-up menu and accessed much like the rune powers. Each can only be used a limited number of times, but are a pretty ideal way to electrocute, burn or freeze your foes. Elemental attacks can be used to counter an enemy too, so if you come across an Ice Wizrobe, you can use a fire attack to do considerably more damage to it. Or if you target a metal crate with a lightning rod, it will shock a larger area. Age of Calamity's combat also packs more mystical powers, and there's no better illustration of this than Impa. This Sheikah is fast, furious and ninja-like, slicing far and wide with her short blade, disappearing and reappearing in a puff of smoke and using seals to grow in power. I particularly love how she catches her hat at the end of this stylish move, and hey, with summoning powers like this, her enemies don't have a hop in hell. I'm so sorry. Perhaps Impa's most alluring ability is one she shares with monk Maz Koshia from the Champions Ballad. She uses the energy of enemies to create clones of herself, amplifying her attacks many times over. Oh, and just in case it wasn't clear, you can swap to any playable character on the battlefield at will, so if you're attempting a mission with 3 friendlies, you can use them all. You can see who's in the battle on the left-hand side of the screen, and yes, you'll also be able to play with a friend in local co-op. Age of Calamity is full of iconic outfits from Breath of the Wild. For Link alone, we've seen him in Soldier's armor, the Champion's tunic, the Hylian outfit, and the Stealth outfit, and other options we've seen in his inventory include the Desert Voe Spalder, Flamebreaker armor, Zora helm, and Snowquill trousers. Will all the armor sets from Breath of the Wild be included? I sure hope so, for obvious reasons. The big question, however, is, do clothes impact gameplay? But Age of Calamity does refer to these options as attire as opposed to armor, so it's entirely possible they're just cosmetic choices. And if that's the case, well, it looks like there will be plenty of semi-naked Links running around in Age of Calamity, particularly if some of Breath of the Wild's fun little touches make it across. Will it hurt to kick open a treasure chest if Link's not wearing pants? And will NPCs react differently to him? Link, and indeed all the other playable characters we've seen to date, will have access to a paraglider. How the hell does that thing support Daruk's weight? Anyway, it can be deployed in-game anytime you're up in the air, so in Link's case you can easily pull it after launching from a Cronus block, and if the ground is sloping down you can actually use it for traversal. How else it will be used in combat or to get around remains to be seen. Let's dig back into combat a bit more. While Link was a generalist in Breath of the Wild, in Age of Calamity he's more of a specialist, and is restricted to 3 weapon classes: Sword and Shield, 2-handed weapons, and spears. That said, it's impressive how different these options look from one another. Plus he's also able to use his bow in the middle of combos, which is pretty cool. Which weapon type should you use? Well, to be honest, I think Sword and Shield is going to be pretty tempting. Why? Because one of my favourite moves from Breath of the Wild is back, shield surfing, and this time it's a high agility attack. Shields also come into their own for players who love parrying. Just wish there was a Guardian nearby to make proper use of it. Oh, and presumably if there are Lionel shields, we'll also be able to use them to attack. Sometimes, however, you won't have a choice of what weapon to use. Age of Calamity sets parameters around combat a lot. This mission, for instance, has the rules restricted allies, 2-handed weapons only, and time limited. This should help ensure you don't rely on one loadout consistently. And besides, while combat in Breath of the Wild was largely about limitless possibilities, it too made good use of situations where you were restricted. Think about the trial of the sword, wielding the one-hit obliterator, or proving your mettle on Eventide Island. Flurry rushes also return, giving players a chance to show off their ability to dodge at just the right time to launch a devastating counterattack. Each character has a unique action on the ZR button. Urbosa's ability to channel and store electricity, for instance, is her ZR move. Link, on the other hand, can sacrifice a little of his health to power up an attack. See how his attacks are flashing red? That's a ZR attack. And you don't need to live with that health hit either, as he can also heal that damage back during battle by pressing X to eat a meal. These mid-battle meals are a spectacle of their own and range from Link casually ripping off a hunk of meat to this absolutely incredible animation. I love how true to Breath of the Wild it is too. Each character also has custom weak point smash attacks. You can trigger this after breaking all the segments on an area boss's weak point gauge. Now really, that's what it's called. And speaking of area bosses, they can each be countered by a specific move. This guy charges at you with a spear, but a well-timed Cronus block neatly interrupts it. Okay, we're almost done, just a couple more things. We'd already seen the pillars around Hyrule Castle rising up as the Calamity took hold in this King Roam flashback, but now we also see a rather unexpected thing from them. They house Stalker Guardians apparently. And you can be sure that facing off against Stalkers, Skywatchers, and turrets will be as much a fixture of the gameplay as fighting Moblins and other enemies. And how about Blood Moons? Will they play a role in Age of Calamity? It's possible given we seem to see one in the announcement trailer. Perhaps this is the very first Blood Moon and is a direct result of Calamity Ganon's resurrection. And lastly, well, I know it's kind of a cheap way to introduce a cute character into a serious story, but I'm totally on board with Age of Calamity's adorable mini Guardian sidekick. Plus, fans have made some pretty solid arguments for the role it plays in combat. Perhaps having the mini Guardian nearby is what gives playable friendly characters the ability to use Sheikah runes. After all, not only is Zelda the only one that actually has the slate, but at this time it was only meant to have the camera, compendium, and album on it. The other runes came later. This question and more will be answered on November 20th when Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity hits switches around the world. For now though, why not dive back into Hyrule and check out our video on why Breath of the Wild is still riveting in 2020, and watch our tutorial on how to bomb impact launch your way around the map. And for everything else, stick with IGN.